Hello, good evening, good morning, welcome, greetings and salutations. Today we've got myself and the wonderful Joelle Dalais, that some people will know, who is the founder of the MetaNet ICU. And this is going to be a special program show podcast today about the truth about CBDCs. So we're going to have a very in-depth history lesson from Joelle, who's going to explain to us the reasoning, maybe the history behind CBDCs. So, welcome, Joelle, and
Thank
thank
you.
you for being here. And go on, give me
So
your take, your
I'm,
story.
I'll give a little bit of brief history of myself, which involves the creation of a prototype of CBDCs, which in 2013, when I discovered what Blockstream was doing in their shenanigans with limiting BTC and so, I decided, this isn't going to get fixed until Satoshi comes back and helps fix things. So I thought, well, I'm going to experiment with some things because I can see that certain things can be done, and I want to try and see if my thoughts are right. So I had a developer working with me, and we experimented. And basically, also in 2013 onwards, I was talking with HM Treasury. And in 2014, I went in for a private closed door meeting. But before
So,
then, sorry, go
first
on.
up, how did you approach HM Treasury? How did that come about to start off with?
Yeah, I didn't tell you that bit. So there's a bit in European law, and as you know, when we were in the EU, but EU law supersedes UK law. Um, so the reason why exchanges in the UK didn't need to get regulated for several years was because there was a bit in law, in EU law, which meant that if the issuer wasn't known, then the business couldn't get regulated, basically. And so I had this long discussion with HM Treasury. I pointed out the parts of the law, and I was starting an exchange in 2013. And I said to them, my point was, I don't need to be regulated, or rather, I can't be regulated, but I want to be regulated. It's legally not possible for me. After some back and forth, they agreed that exchanges don't need to be regulated in the UK. That was at the time as a money service business. And after that point, it opened up a dialogue, and I continued to discuss things with them. And eventually, was invited in for a closed door meeting to discuss Bitcoin and regulation. We discussed quite a
So,
few things.
I was going to
Yeah,
say, at this point, did they know anything about Bitcoin?
the name and that it was used on drug markets, but
Okay, okay,
that
so
was about it.
okay. So this was
Yeah,
a whole education session that you went in to actually
yeah.
tell them about as well. Okay, so how did that conversation go? What kind of came from
Well,
that?
I can't give you all the details, but basically, it was like a 2 to 3 hour conversation with a few people who reported to the chancellor of the time. And in that discussion, I brought up briefly CBDCs, and I was discussing, what things that Bitcoin can and can't do. And I explained that, a pound can be done on Bitcoin, and that eventually it's going to be done everywhere around the world. It won't be just pounds. And that these fiat substitutes, as I called them at the time, I started explaining how they will be far more efficient and stop fraud. And I only explained a few things because it was the main topic of the conversation was Bitcoin itself and
Okay,
what Bitcoin was capable of. But as after that discussion and also before it, I was experimenting with a prototype, and with this prototype, I was tying identity to addresses in the form of that a single person having an address would have an email tied to it, like Paymail.
yeah,
This was a precursor, and email, a telephone number, an IP address, and a rough location because of the IP address. would all be tied to a single address, and you would be able to send to either the email or the telephone number, or you could send to the IP address, IP to IP.
Okay, so there's three different ways of being able to send then. So what happened
Yeah.
if you moved and your IP address moved? I mean, is that just a matter of, how would that work?
The IP address would then change because the email address, you could send to the email address, and if you're sending to the IP address, it would then go to someone else if it was changed, basically.
So would that be a case of, informing everybody that, you've got, I mean, you don't need a wallet in this respect because you're talking about a phone number receiving money or just an email receiving money. So
you would still need a wallet because we were really at prototype stage. Eventually you wouldn't have needed a wallet. You'd have a phone app, because we were going to work on a phone app as well. And the phone app would just basically have your wallet on it, but you would just send to that phone instead. But yeah, at the time, you still needed a wallet, and the wallet would basically, if I moved address and you tried sending to my old address with the IP, and then it would send to whoever lived there, then.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, you'd have to then send to my email. My email address would remain more static. And the other issue we had at the time as well was long codes. We weren't using a constantly changing variable, constant changing long code at the time, but that was on the to-do list as well. On this as well is that we integrated a tax system. I've talked about this briefly in the past, which is a different way of doing taxes. Tax on, I forgot what I called it now. It was point of sale tax. That's it.
Yep.
POS tax. So what happens is that if I'm buying off you, you would say, oh yeah, tax has got to be included on that. And on my side, I would say include tax, and I would pay the tax.
Yeah.
And
this is one of the things that I thought you could actually do with it, was that actually that could just go to straight to HMRC. Yeah. You don't have to wait a year to do all your books. You're doing it at the point of sale, which makes far much more sense to me. I mean, for them and for the retailer. So you'd already so you discussed this with them then?
Yeah, I didn't discuss the tax thing with them. I did bring it up. Tax can be more efficient, more automated, but I didn't discuss it like in further detail. But I did go and then design the software with my developer, and we had it built and working. So tax could be set at different rates. It worked like you said. It would be split off and be sent to whichever recipient address, a tax office or an accountant, if the accountant's doing it for the tax office. And it had tags as well, whereby HMRC and such could just search and see everything which was sent to the tax office from XYZ person. And so they could accumulate all of that automatically. Then at the end of 3 months, if you're doing a VAT return or anything, they could just sum it all up automatically and say, yeah, here's your return, boom.
So this is nearly 10 years ago.
Yeah, around 8-9 years ago. We started it in 2013, 2014 it was finished, and yeah.
So what happened after this presentation to them then? I mean, where are we at the moment?
I always planned to drop the project eventually because it was an experiment for me until Satoshi came back and we could save Bitcoin. But what happened, it got taken over by a businessman from Canada, and who basically brought out my developer, and they started trying to sell the whole thing for lots of money. And from what I know, it didn't go very well from that point. They basically cut me off, and I wish them the best. Unfortunately, the chap has passed away. I think the project's now died around 3-4 years ago. So
okay. So where did that leave you? I mean, with this, this is your idea. You've been to see them. You started developing the prototype. It got bought. Your developer got bought out. I mean,
knowledge and information. It was far more valuable. The knowledge and information I gained from doing all of this. And then the year was around 2015. And it was shortly after that I got into contact with Craig. and Ben had more important things to do with helping to fix things. So yeah, which was all in good timing, really.
Explain then, what are the advantages? What advantages does a CBDC offer compared to other payment systems? So we've explained about the tax POS, yeah.
Yeah, speed of security and security rather. So say if you're trading with someone in France or Africa or Australia, you can send the CBDC, and it's going to be a lot more secure because it's built on Bitcoin. And you don't have to wait for a block settlement if you're doing small transactions, because someone in Australia or New Zealand isn't going to have going to try and defraud you of £100 or £1,000, even £10,000 to try and do to try and redirect that would require tens of millions of pounds worth of mining equipment, and it would be detectable, very easily detectable. And then even if they did do it for £1,000 and risk getting all their stuff seized, then it can be amended, the blockchain can be amended and the funds returned to you. So that's the security. It's the ease of use of sending that far. We discussed this earlier, why it's got to be easier to use. I didn't get time to really put out, but the comparison of sending a transaction with a traditional system in the bank to, say, New Zealand, Japan, or whatever, is fairly complicated compared to, we did an example earlier of putting a phone up to a screen and scanning a QR code, or when just telling someone at Diddy, Diddy at handcast.io. That's so much easier. And to write it in an invoice as well. You don't have to have all the various bank details.
Well, I mean, I'm not on the level that you are, but I do know that when I was living in China, I mean, I would send money home from China, and it would probably take 10 days to actually get there, and it would cost me quite a lot to be able to send that money back. But so
which brings up, sorry, a really good point. If you imagine how much is charged in Forex fees around the world every day, imagine freeing up all that money to the individuals and the businesses, how much more business growth and individual growth, how much more individuals would have for spending and businesses would have for employing more people if all of that capital was freed up. I mean, the amounts that people pay from like China to England or vice versa is, a lot more than 18 cents, especially if you're a big business. But it's also, there's fraud and loss.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fraud and loss. And there's a lot of times when I used to work for a bank called Fiddle, just for the social media. And that was a German bank. And they, when someone sent money, sometimes it just wouldn't arrive. And it would be, being the social media side of it, but it would come to me first. And I'd be like, well, I don't know, I'll put you in the right touch. And after talking to the people there, they'd be like, well, we don't know where the money is. And then what they would have to do would do a trace and all of this. And all banks have this, some kind of trace. And the customer has to pay for that as well. And it can be like £40 or it can be like £100 to do this trace, just to find out where it went.
The customer who's waiting for the transaction to arrive in their bank account is then charged to find out where the money's gone that wasn't sent to them in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's absolutely not the customer's fault.
No.
In a blockchain world with CBDCs, it's very easy to see where your money is. And it's very easy to say, there's my money, sort it out, credit my account.
Yeah. And like you say, I mean, it's a very secure network. So the possibility of fraud diminishes by using the network itself. Using a credit card is very open to fraud, whereas using the blockchain, if there is fraud committed, then it's very easy to find the person who's committed the fraud, whereas it's really vulnerable to you on credit card networks, basically. And it because the way that I understand it is because it makes you more honest when dealing with them?
It's a risk reward. Every criminal operates on a risk reward system, and everyone actually does, not just criminals. And no matter what you're doing, is it worth the risk for the reward, or the time, the effort for the reward, and so on? Unless it's a crime of passion. And what it does, I mean, so you've got this scale of risk and reward for everything people do, and for criminals as well. And a lot of times, oh yeah, I'll rob that place. And the risk might be here or might be high, but the money's really good, and I'll go to jail for 2 years, but afterwards I'll get out and I'll have a few million, and that's it. I'm sorted for life. And that's quite a common occurrence for a lot of criminals. When in the Bitcoin system, and this can be done with CBDCs as well, if someone steals from a bank here and then they go to prison, whatever, all that money can be returned. The ledger gets amended and it's sent back. And so all there is for the criminal is boom, reward right down here, risk up here. As well as, like you said, it's a lot easier to trace them.
Yeah, because you've got a time step. I nicked this off Rohan because it's a time stamped time chain of truth. So every transaction is time stamped onto the blockchain, so you can see exactly the split second that transaction was made and where it went to. So so let's talk then, really, what are the potential risks associated with CBDCs?
Right. So using a CBDC, a country can mess up. Because a CBDC is basically, I'll go back a step. So script is programming language, and script can be compiled to create higher programming language. With this, with either script or the higher programming language, a CBDC is created. Now, what the properties of a CBDC has is completely up to the development and also the management, the people, the treasury, whoever's guiding it. So China's been doing one which has a sell-by date.
So if you don't spend it within a certain amount of time, then that money just disappears, does it, from your wallet? And it's quite a short period of time or something as well. So explain this.
They don't even need to make it disappear. They could just make it unspendable.
Okay.
So yeah, and it is it was an economic theory before of making people spend money so that you stimulate the economy because you're forcing them to spend money, and it's never been possible before. I personally think it's a bad idea.
You will never be able to save in that respect. Yeah.
Unless you're earning vast amounts of money and converting it to something else. But that's why I would say it's a bad idea, because what you're doing is creating an outflow. People won't be able to save, like you said, and then people will sell that for something else, which creates a downward pressure and so on. There's still going to be like a forex competition in the fiat world. There's dollar versus euro versus USD, countries doing competitions, and this is going to be a lot more so in a CBDC world. Because all fiat, if you think of it as technology, so seashells, gold, fiat, etc., they're all the same technology on the same layer. They all do the same technological things. They have advantages above the next. That's why we move from one to the other. But they're all the same. Euro dollars does the same as fiat as pound dollars. The difference is banking systems, like using FPS and such, which isn't actually a technology of the fiat, it's the technology of the bank.
Okay, so explain what FPS is for people that don't know.
Faster payment system. So in most countries, you send money from bank to bank, and it takes, 2 to 3 days.
Maybe even longer than that, but your faster payment system, it kind of, you do it I do it quite a lot, it's supposed to turn up sort of within half an hour or so it's supposed to give
15 minutes. Sometimes with myself it takes 5 minutes or less with some of my accounts, so it is pretty decent. It's the only one in the world. But that's not a part of a fiat system. That is a bank technology. Bitcoin as a whole new system is a different technology, and the CBDCs on top of Bitcoin can't be altered. It's again fiat and Bitcoin, but then CBDCs on top of that, they can have varying utility, like the Chinese one with a sell-by date. You might have a UK one, which whenever anyone spends something, a percentage of that goes towards a welfare system.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You could have also the UK one where part of it goes to the tax, part of it goes to the welfare system. And if people are using this properly, maybe at the end of the year, they get a rebate of a certain amount of money, because the Treasury will be that much richer if they're able to do the tax properly.
Yeah, which is one of the problems at the moment, I feel. Is, I mean, like you say, well, I think we discussed this earlier, you kind of don't actually put your tax returns in until a year after you've actually done the business in the first place. And there's many things that could happen at that, during that year that may prevent you from being able to. But if you can take it from source, then there are great advantages to that. I mean, what measures have been taken to ensure that CBDCs are going to be secure? This is what you're saying about the kind of the settlement layer, and then the addresses and the pay, like.
This is one thing which they're very lucky in the steps we've taken with Bitcoin, is that towards PayMail, is that they've already got that security inbuilt.
It's already been built.
CBDC, it's already been built. The ease of use. PayMail is just another Lego brick on top of a stack of Lego bricks, which is supposed to build on top of PayMail. So they can use that system in CBDCs as well. So the security is there. The fault is what extra criteria they create their CBDC with. Will they do a Chinese version? Because there's a lot more things they could do. There's stuff your guest was bringing up about blocking people from spending on certain items.
Yeah. So say, go on.
That is technically possible, but it's really actually quite a pain to do, because each of those items would have to have a meta tag. So say like I'm selling chocolate bars.
Yeah.
And you've got the UK CBDCs. I would have to be selling the chocolate bar with the system and having the meta tag chocolate bar. And it would have to have the specific criteria if anyone spends GBP pound on meta tag choco, and then to invalidate it.
So literally what we're talking about here is you would have to put literally the whole of the world supply chain onto some kind of meta tag system that would be, because obviously your chocolate, is maybe it's imported. Yeah. So to be able to use on a specific country's CBDC.
Yeah. So it's possible, and maybe in 20, 30 years time, we're going to have everything meta tagged, and a country might decide, let's stop them buying this. And countries should be free to mess up. We shouldn't be enforcing certain things. A government and such should be free to mess up and to do things like this. If they do, and then a new political party should have the right and the power to go, right, we're not going to do that. That was daft, so vote for us. And also the users will find it's a lot easier in a CBDC world to move from pound substitute to euro substitute, because they're like, this is silly. I'm going to use francs, and I'm going to buy my chocolates with francs. And a shop, me as a shop, will go, you know what? I'm going to start accepting euros because I want to sell my chocolate.
Yeah. The products need selling. See, I myself, I had this vision that basically you would put governments onto a system like this so that they could transact within themselves with each individual governmental department, and then that would be transparency. And that, I feel, is a really good use of them, because any fraud that's committed within governmental departments would be tracked and traced immediately, flagged up, etc. But also it would be far more efficient for all the government departments to be running on this kind of system. And you're talking about the supply chain of government, your HR, your payment systems, etc. So for a government and a government entity, I feel it's a perfect system for governments to actually implement and use. However, whether or not they feel that is another matter. So yeah, go on.
Imagine a political party emerging which states, we're going to use CBDCs and we're going to have a public address, because it's going to be hard not to have a public, which is going to be our donations address. So you can see not only the money we're receiving, but who is sending money to us. And then you'll be able to follow that money out and see what we're spending it on.
What we're spending it, exactly. And that's where the transparency... Yeah.
Would you vote for that party or for another party who's like, we're not going to let you know who's sending us money or where we're spending our money and which individuals of our staff is actually our MPs? Because you'll also be able to have a separate thing for each MP, which will be public as well.
Yeah. So that's where using a system like that for governmental departments is actually a real advantage, because they are showing, like you say, the transparency of where that money's coming from, where that money's going, how it's being used, if they're using it, the percentage they said out on their campaigns. Yeah, we're going to use, say, this much for schools, or this much for the army, or this much, and you can see that in real time being used.
And not only is it good for the end users and the people who want to vote for them, it's good for that political party to say, I'm confident that the majority of people would vote for an honest, transparent government. And that's what they want. And if, say, like I was running a political party on this basis, and I was saying, look, you can see where all the money's going. If for some reason my Chancellor of the Exchequer is doing a bit of dodgy tax fraud, you will be able to see it, and he will be held accountable. And not only will they be held accountable, but you can have a blooming committee and such, and you can sue the government to amend that ledger and take that money back and put it back into the coffers to be spent on the people where it should be spent.
We're talking about implementing regulations, and what was the takeout from your conversation that you had with them? And do you think that this is something that they are seriously looking at to be able to implement it within government systems?
It was years ago, and also that keep in mind that HM Treasury changes its staff like every 2 years. And so the people I talked to were like 3 different groups over the years. And even that last group would have been long gone, and changed 2 or 3 times since. Because the last time I talked to them was like 2018. I didn't discuss pay mails or anything like that. It was just my own experiment. It hadn't gone forward yet, like in BSV. It wasn't talk about CBDCs. It was mostly talks about Bitcoin itself. They were interested, but I didn't expand on it because I wanted to keep that knowledge and information to expand on at a later time.
They're only there for a couple of hours. It's very difficult, isn't it? So,
and I have a habit of really getting to a subject and going on and on and on. So I have to keep making myself more concise.
Maybe getting too technical for the ears that are listening at the time.
Okay. Well, they were pretty technical. They were pretty intelligent, and it was nice. Nice change, but they didn't understand Bitcoin or the capabilities. They didn't know a thing about script language, and the discussion was about also, would new regulations need to be created, and in large part, no. Some regulations might need to be tweaked very slightly on digital signatures. So digital signatures, electronic signatures, is already there. You can use a CBDC address and name to electronically sign a contract now, and that would be legally enforceable if you have an identity tied to that CBDC address, that PayMail address.
Okay, so is that a little bit like, I mean, what people call a smart contract? I mean, basically, what you're attaching a legal contract to a transaction.
No,
Explain the difference between
just
the
a
two.
normal contract. As a smart contract is like just using a script code to do something. It's honestly not that fancy. It's just using a script code and making it do something. Like a proper like smart contract would be using CBDCs in IoT and making automation. So you could, right? So one way to how a CBDC could be much stronger than other countries is automation, and allowing people who use CBDCs to automate purchases, and like when they're out of milk and.
So anything that's a regular purchase, basically, that you
Yeah.
would have on a standing order or a direct debit, you could actually do it that way. Yeah, with the
Yes.
CBDC, and that would be okay.
Also, the fact that countries will also have much more microeconomics control, granular control, and macroeconomics as well. So with the microeconomics, they will be able to see where about in the country things are being spent. And say, for instance, there's a lot of extra spending in the north of XYZ, and they want to move that spending to the south. They could then provide subsidies in the right areas in the CBDC, and generate the growth in specific areas they want to grow.
Yeah, because they will be able to see what is being spent. Like literally, we've given you this amount of budget, but actually you haven't spent any of this at all. So it's going to be better used in a different area, because we can see that actually it's just surplus to your requirements and it isn't needed. And that also stops the in-government fraud of then, well, we've got all this money we haven't spent yet.
Yeah, 100%. A few years ago in Plymouth, and there's a lot of people who aren't very wealthy in Plymouth, right? The council had something like, I don't know, a few million left at the end of the year. And they were like, what do we spend this on? We spent £1 million on Christmas lights, and then they paid someone like a ridiculous amount to have a discussion with them on how they should spend their money, something like 150,000, just to discuss with them how they should spend their extra money. And then I can't remember some of the other things, but it was like a bunch of ridiculous things, and you could tell they were just throwing money at their friends.
City council logos for like £350,000. I think that's something similar that happened in my area. And then you think about, okay, well, that money could very well be spent on something a lot something better, and that's actually going to help the community more, but instead we've just wasted it, and this is taxpayers' money. So again, I can see why that is such a good idea.
If you imagine Matrix, the film, with all the things going up, except things have got meta tags. And then you're able to go, right, Manchester spending, swipe all of that. Manchester spending from City Council, swipe that down there.
Yeah.
Manchester spending City Council on Christmas, put that there. And then compared to Plymouth and such, you will be able to draw out this information and even have it color-coded and graphs and pie charts and whatever else. And it will be like you just said. You will be able to see differences in spending from here to there. You will much be able to guide spending from here to there and move it around, and that will give a lot of growth to a country.
Oh yeah, no, completely. I can see that, and I also feel that the way that you would do that is through AI. So you'd have some kind of forensic AI that was routing through all the payment systems to see where the wastage is, and to flag up where the wastage is. Or am I on the right track? Or
I personally don't like the term AI. I like IA. It's a new term I'm pushing out, which is intelligent automation, which basically means there's always a human behind it. It might be doing things cleverly, but it's intelligent for human automation. Rather than artificial intelligence, it's like, oh, it's going to run off on its own and do world domination crap. And it's like, no, it's always a human behind it. And but yeah, basically the same, like you just said. You can automate these things, and it can draw up automatic pie charts and graphs and say, this lot is being wasted here. It's still going to take a human to look at it and to go, right, okay, brilliant. And then it's going to take government officials and such to go, right, let's reorganize the spending a bit, and we need to import XYZ, because also as well, this can be done on a macroeconomics global scale, where you can have a much better understanding of what goods are coming in and out of the country and what's happening around the world. And then you can actually, for a country, you could actually go, right, you know what, this country is selling XYZ for cheaper at the moment, and we actually could do with a little bit of that, so let's buy it from that country instead of our usual place.
Government debt. Well, I was just thinking about the government debt basically would kind of, it would save a lot of money because of obviously the way for, the microtransactions and nanotransactions, etc., more efficiency. So therefore, really government debt should be a lot lower, whether or not governments would like that. Because I mean, as far as I'm aware, banking systems work on debt. So what are the implications of a CBDC for a banking system?
Well, banking systems, they not just debt. They currently do. I will admit that they work heavily on debt and trying to get people in debt and such. But it's loans and mortgages, which comes under loans. That can still be done just as easily. They'll still be able to do a lot of different loans in CBDCs and mortgages, house mortgages. The really interesting thing as well about the housing thing, what banks should be at the forefront of doing this, but they're slow and, well, they don't understand the technology. In the current mortgage system, you have the top-down approach, where you go to a bank or house lenders or whatever, and they will lend you a lump sum of money, and then you slowly pay back that lump sum of money. In the future Bitcoin world, with CBDCs also, because this is also a good way of increasing a CBDC strength, is you take investments from many, many different people from all over the world, a pound here, a pound there. Say I want 50,000 investments of £1 each. To put down a mortgage for this house, whatever, and I'm going to open it out to the world, right? And because it's such a low investment, one, they might not need to be KYC'd because it's only £1. Two, if you need them to be KYC'd, you can get, as we discussed previously, identity tied to specific addresses. So they just need a PayMail address which has been ID'd. And then three, because it's such a low level amount of money, the risk for loss to the investment is very low. So it's much more likely to get more people going, I'll put £1 in. And so it's the, I've forgotten what my term was for it now. It's the sideways approach, rather than down approach, where you get loads of different people investing in. And the key thing is as well, because it's Bitcoin and microtransactions and fees are so low, you can pay back every month your mortgage repayment to those 50,000 people.
No, completely. So if 1 month you are really loaded, you can get rid of a lot, because they're smaller amounts. So you've paid more of the people that have helped you in the first place. And because it's only a small amount, like you say, I'm not going to miss £1, but I know that I've helped somebody to be able to achieve a dream of actually being able to buy their own property. So
I mean, you don't pay them back £1. You have a £300 a month or £400 a month mortgage repayment every month, as you do in normally. And those, you do a £400 split to 50,000 people. Every month. That's impossible to do in the current system. But the key thing is you do it with CBDCs, because you can have all the extra tags of identity. And also, if you do CBDCs, then the country you're living in, grow stronger as well, because everyone's got to buy that CBDC to be able to do that process.
And this is the beauty of the split payments as well. And it's not only on mortgages. I mean, I was talking to Monday a while ago, who's in Nigeria, and he was on about an idea that he's had about helping farmers. So, you could do this sideways approach where people will sponsor, put some money in so that the farmers can continue to actually grow food, and especially say for disaster relief or something. So, your charities in that respect with the disaster relief, it would actually go to the people that really need it as well. So, and not be wasted and, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So banks can still charge that extra fee after sorting out a mortgage. So they're still earning money off mortgages. They can still provide for loans, and even if 100% of the loan is coming from somewhere else, they can still charge a fee for arranging it and providing the platform. They can still provide accounts allotted in CBDCs, which people can use for business banking and such. They can still provide overdrafts in the respective CBDCs. And if you're doing it in Bitcoin, see, there's a problem doing overdrafts in Bitcoin because of a limited supply.
Yeah.
Banks can't really do it in that. But with CBDC, they can do overdrafts in that, because a CBDC would work with the central bank, the treasury, creating X amount of money, going through Bitcoin and pumping it into their CBDC.
Basically, it's a token. So what's the difference between a CBDC and existing cryptocurrencies?
A lot. Basically, a CBDC should be built on BSV, on Bitcoin, for the security and the microtransactions and all the functionality of the script language. The other thing as well is that they won't be anonymous. They'll be private.
Yeah.
People will still operate privately. You'll be able to add tags to them. Like if it's done properly, that is, because like the Chinese one, you can't do a fraction of these things, but you'd be able to do add tags to them for like products or people, KYC and address, which is using it. All these other little things as well. So they can be, you could say there's an invisible page of 100 different utility types that a CBDC can have. Some banks will tick 50 and implement that. Some banks will tick 2 or 3. And some banks might go overboard and tick 100 and say, we want all of this, which too much can be crazy. Doing it. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it.
Yeah, very much so. So what impacts do you think CBDCs are going to have on monetary policy then?
Oh, there'll be a lot more granular control. Like we were discussing about moving money around, providing subsidies for different businesses and such. And if it's done right and they can see all this happening, they will be able to grow economies a lot more. Whereas the treasuries, like in each country, is in charge of monetary policies and such. I think it will make the importance of the treasury and what they're doing a lot more important. And it will really require them to know their things and possibly to recruit more people, because they'll have more work to do. And
more opportunities seem to be kind of available within the way that you're explaining it. So more opportunity, more jobs, more people kind of basically transacting within the system, within the network. So that flow of money is constantly, there's more flow basically.
Yeah, absolutely. More granular control. And I want to address some of the fear points.
That was my next question, kind of the challenges and the cons of and what people might not understand.
Yeah. We addressed briefly earlier, what if they want to stop you buying chocolate and such. And then basically people, you move to euro, the shopkeeper will move to euro. If the shopkeeper's just not allowed to sell you chocolate, which, to be absolutely honest, if a country wanted you to stop buying chocolate, it's a lot easier just to make chocolate illegal. bin to block it in all, the spending and all of that. Because otherwise what will happen is all the shops will still get chocolate in, and they'll just sell it to you in a different CBDC or trade it to you for something else.
Yeah. I could go and give you my gold ring and have a pound of chocolate. Yeah.
Or I mean, what's to stop me from going into, say, like your store and saying, I want this chocolate, but I can't send you the money, so I'll pay for this milk instead, which is the same price as the chocolate, and just give me the chocolate, keep the milk. The shop will go, okay, it's a sale. So makes a lot more sense for them just to ban chocolate, which will have nothing to do with CBDC. So that's that one. And as to identity, people are feared, but track everything you do. And I think, no, people need to understand the static over the variable, which is paymail. So as the end user, say like Diddy's the government, she's trying to track me. If and also split transactions. So if I buy something for £10, I mean, it gets sent to a paymail, but on the blockchain, they don't see that. They see that it gets sent to a long code address, a newly generated one, which has had no transactions before. And then the change gets sent back to me and split amongst many different long code addresses. It's pretty hard to track. It's a lot easier to track if, say, Diddy's sending me £1 million for something, because large amounts stand out a lot more.
Yeah.
In most cases, if Diddy's sending me £1 million for something, it's because she's buying something expensive off me. And in those cases, she will have a receipt, which I'm pretty sure she will ask for one. And me as a business, I'd want to give you one. Otherwise, how do I account for £1 million in my business? When I'm doing my tax.
Yeah,
and such.
exactly. Yeah.
Not only will it get taken off me, but I'll be done for something, for tax evasion or something. The key point of there is that criminals won't have a tax receipt or a receipt at all. And so, say if someone's buying £1 million of heroin or such, they're not going to get a receipt for that. Or if their receipt says heroin, and then, well, they're stupid. When you see this type of money moving, it's a lot easier for people to see it and track it. And generally, myself and Craig, we don't care about the £10 and the £50 and a small amount of like drug purchases. No one's going to track that. No one cares. It's the big amounts of money. And I'll say something as well about criminology. In the current system, a lot of times low-level people get caught and they get imprisoned and they serve time. And even we're talking up to people who deal in tens of thousands or 50,000 or maybe even up to like £1 million. But the high-level people, they don't deal with the drugs. They just move the money around.
Yeah.
They never touch the drugs and they never get caught. When these low-level people get caught, they just get recycled to different people and the drugs goes on.
It's very much like a general in the army.
Yeah, absolutely. And people in law enforcement such, they know this. They know it's an endless cycle.
It's interesting that you bring this particular subject up as well, because there are, with cannabis, common law, medical. So in America, cannabis is legalized. In Canada, it's legalized in certain states in America, but for medical purposes. So we're talking really the drugs that do the serious damage, the hardcore kind of and like you said, the big monetary values. So all that you would want to.
My history in past, my acceptance of drugs is just like I don't care so much, as long as loads of people do drugs, as long as they're not pushing it onto other people or causing serious harm to themselves or their family and such. As long as they're getting on with their life, it's not a problem. A drug problem is defined as someone who is solely reliant on a drug and it's causing interference with their life.
And this is something that Bitcoin was by Scenario, I think they're called now, but they were EHR data. So again, this is something that I see would be great for governmental entities, which is like the NHS, which isn't yet fully private, but actually track that. What they did was track opioids, so they could actually keep a tag on addiction and minimize addiction problems. So this is also something else that is a use case for Bitcoin, but actually CBDCs would stop that right at the point of sale.
Yeah, well, stopping people from, what do you mean, buying opioids?
But yeah, because it forces the honesty. I mean, but then again, I suppose if the problem is there, then they would go and pay cash. But I mean, I suppose I'm looking at different use cases for the networks itself and how they would work.
The key thing on the drugs thing is that it would be a lot easier to find the big drug people, the ones who sit above the people who always get caught. And it's not just about the drugs, it's about selling people and a lot of human trafficking, weapons and such. And drugs is used in some of these things to keep people compliant. But it's also the fact of just human trafficking itself. The money moves in large amounts. These things can be tracked a lot easier. I mean, my belief in the drug system as well, which in a way does tie into this, is that things should be more legal. They should be regulated. And then in a regulated market, if things are more legal and regulated, then you can meta tag things. And then you can do the tracking thing, like you said. And then you can measure or not whether or not someone's having like copious amounts and, whether they're having an issue or something.
Because I mean it's saying about the opioid crisis. I mean, that was something that was created by the pharmaceutical companies. So we can therefore, talking about pharmaceutical companies with that kind of thing, forcing them to use a CBDC would also force them to be honest.
There's what's it called again? Methadone. Methadone, for the listeners, is a legal watered down version of heroin, which doctors prescribe to recovering heroin addicts. And it's sometimes doctors sell it illegally to their patients for extra money.
And tracking metadata supply chain would definitely combat all of that.
Which doctors are doing that. Sometimes doctors also have their prescriptions forged. So if you have a repeat prescription and such, and the doctor said, no, you've got to come off that, you scan the prescription, you change the date, you forge the doctor's signature, give it to the pharmacy or whatever, you can get some more. And methadone, illegal methadone and stuff is on the heroin market in the UK. People will go out and get it if they can't get heroin. Quite often they can't get heroin, but methadone is more available because the doctors give it out and then they make extra money on it. Some doctors purposely do it and will. I've not heard. Well, like I say, I've heard of doctors just giving it out extra. Because what happens is that they'll have a recovering addict or just an addict who gets really anxious, I would say apparently threateningly to some people and such. And these are things which I've been told firsthand.
I suppose because this is the addiction that's kicked in, is because they feel as though it's an absolute necessity for them to have the drug, and that's where the addiction side of it is. When actually it's like because they start feeling the withdrawals or something. So yeah.
I mean, heroin is biologically addictive if you have it repeatedly for at least 6 months. And some of these people, they've been on it for years. It's a sad case, and I can understand the argument that methadone is used to help wean people off, but it's when it's abused and being sold as extra money for doctors who already get paid enough.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, even alcohol. So, I mean, the British are notorious for being drinkers. Pub life is something that's very big. So, again, I mean, I suppose there are pros and cons to this, because as a consumer, if you're going to the pub and you're using a CBDC and your alcohol consumption is being monitored, then you're probably going to feel like that's a con. But actually it could really be a pro, because actually what it's doing is it's helping you monitor your health so that you will live a healthier life and maybe live longer and not become addicted to, because alcohol addiction is also something. So am I on the right tracks, or is that just my own?
No, you're on the right track. I'm going to throw in what I strongly believe the future will hold in this regard. The government will not track things like this, but there will be businesses for profit who will provide things like watches, which will track things like this. So it will be up to the individual if they want to track themselves.
To be more responsible for their own healthcare, really.
And what they will then be able to do is put in their own paymail into their watch address, and then that will monitor how much they're spending towards XYZ, and maybe that will warn them, you've spent this much and such. But that will be a individual choice and private business choice. It won't, governments will leave that to businesses and individuals to sort out.
That goes for opening up more opportunities for businesses as well, then, because you've got all these. I mean, I have an app which basically it tracks my steps, but I get rewarded for the tracking of those steps. Sweat coins, so they look, it's called Sweat, so they will look at, you do steps, we track your steps, and we will reward you for as many steps as what you've done with a Amazon gift card, which is great. It gives you a bit more incentive to try and go out there and do some steps every day. So yeah, I can see that. So like, what are the challenges then for businesses?
Building the technology, making sure that's private. That's a key challenge, which is quite readily doable. And because of GDPR laws and such, and if you're using the blockchain technology to, monitor an individual's consumption or health or whatever, and then you want to do it in a way which is private just for the individual. Anonymous, because anonymous would be daft, because then no one would know whose it is.
So there is a question I have for you. I feel that there's a shortage of developers that actually understand the technology. So is that the case? And if so, that's the case. I mean, the Meta Knight ICU is kind of I see that as an educational kind of membership as well, because there are people and developers in there. So what's the outreach like? For trying to get more people involved and being interested in this kind of technology and developing?
There is a shortage of developers, but I would say there's a shortage of other people, of like business leaders more. Because there are developers, I see more developers who are like, oh, I'm a developer, I want to build this, I can do this, I can do that. But they don't have the business ideas on how to get from A to B. They can build it, and they build something cool and interesting, but there's no need, there's no requirement for it in the market, and then they fall flat on their face. I feel that our immediate space is more business leaders, venture capitalists as well, to help the business leaders grow, and developers. There's a fair amount, but we could always do with more, because there's always a lot more to do. But I think that the content creators is important at this point, because that will inspire business leaders. So it's a at first, years ago, I was attracting developers, and that went well. We have a stable base of developers, and as I said, a bit of an overflow. But I would say content creators, business leaders, and VCs then to support content creators and business leaders. We've
Block Dojo is a perfect one in London, and they've just expanded out into the US at the moment. So if we've got more kind of places like Block Dojo that can incubate businesses and nurture those ideas, then that's definitely going to be something that's really good for the network, the ecosystem, and for businesses in general anyway, because of the honesty and the track and etc. I mean, how do you get around this this paranoia though that people do have? I suppose the problem is, if you are committing a crime, then you need to be paranoid about the fact that you're going to get caught one day. But if you're an honest person and you're not committing any crimes, there's no problem whatsoever for using this kind of system, is there?
I mean, people commit crimes all the time.
Without even knowing it, going down the street and having a cup of coffee or walking in the park sometimes. Yeah.
I remember Craig did a talk about once, Coke cans will be tracked as well, and you throw it in the sea, people will know instead of throwing it over there. But it's time and effort. There's this time and effort and cost analysis in that time and effort to track every single little thing. Even if you automate it all, you're going to need someone to chase up the Coke can droppers, the chocolate bar wrapper droppers, every single little thing. And they're going to do it with the big stuff. But as we work down the chain, they're just going to say, just can't be bothered. How about we just create a reward system for people dropping their Coke cans in the bin? And a reward system for this and that, rather than having to chase them all down and punish them.
But they are good incentives, aren't they? After all, at the end of the day, I will go for more walks because I'm going to be rewarded for that with my steps. So it is a great incentive. Yeah.
We operate in a punishment type system, which has been slowly moving to rehabilitative. And
that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, that's a really good point. Go on. Yeah.
In the medieval ages and before, it was just heavily punishment. It was heavily punishment, and also what's the word, to put people off, preventing from crimes. There's a word for it, but it was punishment.
Yeah.
And demonstrative, I'm going to say, but I'm sure there's a specific word for it. But now we're moving to punishment and rehabilitative, where we try and rehabilitate people so they can become part of society again. But there's still a heavy hand in punishment in our current age. What we can do, and what I believe we will do, is move to a more reward system. So rewarding people doing the right things.
More of a humanistic approach to being human, but actually still recognizing that some crimes really do need some form of punishment. Yeah.
I mean, I actually believe in capital punishment for certain things.
Yeah.
I know there's, when someone has done something really obvious that they've admitted to it, and it's a case of murder or worse, and then I do somewhat believe in capital punishment. I don't think a system should. I'm open to being proven wrong and to being corrected and such if somehow this comes to bite me in the butt years down the line. But I'm just going to put this in now. I do understand that some people are wrongly convicted, and that years later they can be proven right, and you don't want to do capital punishment or someone like that if they've been proven right. But there are cases where people are blatantly guilty and they've even admitted to it. I know that also some people falsely admit to being guilty so that they can be paid by whoever did commit the crime. Anyway, that aside, I don't believe in capital punishment for everything, only very, very small scale thing. That aside, if we move to a more reward system, and there should still be some kind of punishment because you can't reward bad behavior. What you need to do is reward good behavior. But if someone still does something bad, and then the punishment system, should still be there, and you take away the reward. That's the key thing. So there's no reward for doing a bad thing. It's just you've done a bad thing, and there's going to be punishment.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone's done a good thing, they've littered well, they've helped a granny across the street or something like that. I don't know how you reward someone crossing the street, but generalistic good behavior, if that's rewarded, and then people just will fall into a way of doing good behavior all the time, even without a reward, after a while, because it becomes the social norm.
Yeah. So I do have a question. How do you think the public perception is at this moment in time about CBDCs?
I think it's largely misunderstood, and that people are really worried about the 1984 George Orwell's approach. They think it's going to be used to track people to the letter, and also be used to block people's payments, and government will come in with overarching like controls and being like, you can't buy milk, you can't buy this and that. I understand their fears, and there are bad governments, and I'm going to say that this, what they fear, is potentially it can be done, but as we discussed earlier, you'd have to have a lot of meta tags, and everyone using the right wallets and such. Also, your identity can't be linked to every single PayMail address you have. It can only be linked to specific ones. So if you wanted to spend without someone knowing your identity, you just get a new wallet. Unless every wallet requires you to KYC yourself, which it just won't be that way. It's understandable that people have this fear, because it is possible. But if you fear everything which is technically possible in the world, you're never going to go forward with technology.
Well, this is
you're going to fear everything.
Yeah, I mean, this can be said of absolutely everything. They're not even just technology,
It's like you mentioned something about the industrial era, and you're quite right. People feared all of that, and if you fear all of this stuff, you're not going to move forward. Society won't move forward, and society will end up eating itself if it stays stagnant too long.
I suppose this is to something that we were talking about earlier, is the speed of it. So there are a lot of people that are really just happy with their lives, and they're not really technologically minded, and they get very scared because of the speed of progression of technology, and they can't keep up with it. So I kind of get, because my thing is about the Industrial Revolution, sort of the 1800s, and the implementation of railroads and things like that, which people were worried about. But like we say, these things can be amazing and marvelous, and they can help society and the wider society in such positive ways. But initially, there's always going to be a kind of, well, what if? So I suppose it's weighing and making sure that balance is there, so we're not leaving people behind, but we're not or not me, but so unaware of the worries and fears that people do have, and trying to educate in a sense that will make them appreciate the good side of things, as well as.
I want to put some in before you go too far
Yeah.
what I want to say.
Yeah.
There will absolutely be people left behind. There will be people left behind. There's a lady, I used to help out at my parents' shop. They used to own a shop. And there was a lady in there, it was early 70s. She would come in with a card. She'd ask me to use it for her because she just didn't know what to do. And we're talking, all she had to do was put the card in and type in a PIN number. And I showed her 1,000 times, and she just wouldn't, it didn't. She didn't have any mental health issues or anything like that, but she just couldn't fathom the technology. And so, there will be people left behind, but we can't hold the march of progress just for one or two people. Also, as well, to say, I was saying there will be bad governments. We can't stop that either. People vote in governments and corrupt people, twist the system. But what we absolutely can do is use the tools to get a good government into power. That's what we haven't been able to do before, is if people need to stand up, obviously a individual or political party, group of people And when they're willing, when we have people willing to stand up in one country will lead the way, because they will win. If they can really show what they're doing and the transparency and honesty of it, they will win the votes of that country. And then other countries with other political parties will go, huh, they came from nowhere. They either won or they got really high votes, you know. We can do what they do, except we can do it better, or we can do it the same. And that will cause a shift and a change in political systems around the world. And it won't happen in a heartbeat. It will happen slowly. But once it happens and it starts happening around the world, then it will seem like, oh my God, it's an avalanche of
just like
all,
a
all these
wave,
governments
turned into a wave, and then we will
exactly. All these governments using these transparent and honest systems, and the tools that they're using will force honesty and transparency, will force them to be, because you know they won't, they'll be tracked, their monies will be seen and everything, and they will get the votes. If they want the votes and they want to stay in power, they will continue to use the systems.
Yeah. What kind of words of wisdom have you got for UK populace about, you know, what we've been talking about, CBDCs? How do you see, you know, how long do you think it's going to be before they're implemented? And because it is going to happen at some point.
If someone in our immediate sector got the recent job that was advertised, then it could be done in easily 6 months, easily.
But, right, so we're talking about the head of central bank digital currencies that they're advertising for. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I say 6 months at a stretch. It could be done within 4 months, because we've got most of the tools built already. All that would need to be built would be apps, some phone apps for payment tools, and then to reach out to get certain businesses involved, and then boom, done.
But so is one of the takeaways as well that CBDCs are not going to replace fiat currencies? They're going to work alongside them.
They will eventually replace them, but I can't see them replacing them for like 5 to 10, probably closer to 10 years. Okay. But they will eventually replace them.
If everything is digital and there is, like, I don't know, a solar flare or a cataclysmic event, okay, and everything has gone digital, how do we as a society continue to function if it all goes offline?
A society will, if that all happens, we're going to have a lot more bigger problems than worrying about money. There'll be planes dropping out of the sky onto our heads, and you know everything. You know, we won't be able to communicate at all, and there'd be a lot more problems. And the money system would be the least of it, because we'd just go back to barter. People would just start bartering goods and threatening each other, which wouldn't be great. But they'll go to, you know, the jewelry that's on your persons and whatnot. But if it was a temporary solar flare, there are bunkers which are protected from solar flares, so things would get back up and going again. But yeah, the immediate concern would be all the people who've died from the planes and the boats crashing and cars and electric cars and such and around, because cars might just go, normal engine cars might get shut down as well. All the crashing and all the dead, hospitals, all the people on that would be pretty bad.
Well, yeah, so the main takeout is that basically there are bigger things to worry about than a
much bigger
CBDC.
Yeah, there'd be massive case of pillaging after all of that as well. And then it would be a case of trying to get things back to order again. Yeah, but by then there'd still be a lot of chaos. But you know, I don't know. That's I would be more concerned about surviving than worrying about your money. Yeah,
Joel, thank you so much. Are there any takeouts that you want to leave with?
Yeah, I just want to throw in as well that I said about CBDCs could be done in 6 months. I reckon actually possibly 4 months, but I don't think it's going to happen that soon. I think that whoever gets this job might not be as knowledgeable on the CBDCs as some people in our immediate sector, and that it will probably take at least 3 to 5 years at least maybe 3 years to roll out an initial plan, 3 years, and then 5 years to slowly expand it. And the fiat will operate alongside CBDCs for quite a long time to come. I think a major tipping point will be a political party accepting CBDCs and running with the whole BSV blockchain as its foundation.
Which is the only one that can scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joelle, thank you so much for this enlightening and highly educational lesson about the truth of CBDCs. Absolutely wonderful to have you here and be able to tell us about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.